Hello and welcome everyone. Welcome to another video, and today I present to you a crash course on my favorite Sveltekit library, Sveltekit Superform. I've gotten a lot of requests to do a video on this particular library for a long time, and today I'm making your wishes come true. The way this is going to work is I'm going to be going through the docs page by page and showing you how to implement what is being said in the docs in your applications. And the reason why I'm doing it this pattern and not just scripting the whole thing and doing it in this perfect production way is because of I want to teach you guys how to read documentation. That is one issue I have noticed a lot of developers have, is that they have an hard time going to the doc, reading it, and actually understanding and being able to move information from the docs into their own application. And this is actually a very, very vital skill that you need to learn because of, as a developer, a lot of things are going to change a lot. So you're going to have to do a lot of reading, a lot of updates are going to happen. So for example, on the Superforms doc, we have this video right here that explains Superforms on the base level. But this video is like a year ago or something, and it's pretty outdated because of right now we have Superforms version 2. And who knows, maybe next year we'll be having Superforms version 5. And this video that I'm doing currently would also be obsolete as well. But you know what would never be obsolete, what would never be outdated would be the official docs. So if you learn how to read the official docs, you would always get the up-to-date information that you need. And anytime you have an issue, you don't have to be scrolling through YouTube or scrolling through blogs and articles. You go straight to the docs and you get the information that you need, and your answers will be there. So that's why we're going to be following this pattern. And enough of that. So what is Sveltekit Superforms? Now, from the name, it's a form library. You can get the fact that it's a form library because the name is literally Superforms, and it's one of the best, if not the best, form library for any JavaScript framework out there, hands down. I have used a bunch of them, and this by far is my favorite. And one great thing that it does, it has support for multiple validation libraries. I use solely Zod, and I swear by Zod. But whatever validation library you like to use or you want to use, you can use and follow the tutorial, and there will not be any issue. So as you can see, we have a bunch of them listed here. A lot of them I don't even know. The only one I'm familiar with is Zod and Yop. The rest, just seeing them for the first time. And it's Superforms, you can do a ton of things with it. In fact, it's the amount of things you can do with Superforms that's just amazing. And I'm pretty sure that once you guys get using this, once you use this once, you will not want to use this any other thing for your forms. You know, we want to handle your forms any other way because of the immense power that this library has. So, as I said, we'll be going through page by page, and I'll be showing you how to use Superforms and the documentation. The first thing that I want you to do is to set up a Sveltekit application. Now, without Sveltekit, you can't use Sveltekit Superforms. It's in the name, Sveltekit Superforms. So set up a Sveltekit application. I'm not going to show you how to use this. If you don't know how to set up a Sveltekit application, then you probably shouldn't be watching the video on Superforms. So set that up. I already have mine set up already. And let's jump back into the documentation. Now I'm on the Get Started page. And on the Get Started page, they give you a very simple way to just get started. Know the packages you want to install. And they have this very nice select. So I'm using PNPM, and my validation library is Zod, and that's why we have this command to paste on the terminal to install the dependencies that we need. PNPMI, Sveltekit Superforms, and then Zod. So if you are using, let's say, NPM and Yop, yours will be different, and all you have to really do is just copy it and paste it in your terminal. I'll switch by Mac back to the one I'm using. I'll copy this and I'll paste this on the terminal. Yeah. I'll actually run this as well so we can see this in the browser. PNPM dev, run that, and let's take a look at how this is going. Okay, and this should completely install by now. Now I have Superforms and Zod installed successfully, and I also have my application running. So if I check the browser, we have localhost 5173 on, and we have Superform Rock. That's because of I've actually written this in the page right here, giving me this unknown. And Superforms is a household name, so we are going to make this I'm gonna add this to the user settings. Cool. All right, so let's go back to the documentation and follow the docs guide on how to use Superforms. So if you've not created your Sveltekit project, this is simply the command. Go ahead and run that. We've done that already. And the first thing we need to do when using Superforms is to create the validation schema. So for this example, they're also using Zod as well. As you can see, the main thing required to create a Superform is a validation schema representing the form data for a single form. So we're going to use this example, which is like a login sort of example. And they also gave you this notice telling you that the schema should be defined outside the load function. And this is very important to make the caching work so that you don't have to reuse or rerun this thing all the time you want to use it. The data will just be memorized. All right, so I'm going to copy this. And the way that I use this is I like to create a different file in a libraries folder or lib folder called probably schema.ts. And now please let me increase my font size a little bit. And I'll place the schema here and I'll just call this I'll call this the schema, works fine. And let's explain what's going on here. Now, for those of you that might be using a different validation library, you might have your reasons, but you will still be able to implement this same thing, but for your own validation library, if you understand your validation library well. So make sure that whatever validation library you are using, you understand it well. And if you're not really sure what validation library to use, you don't really know how to use any of them, then just go ahead and use Zod. It's one of the best out there, and you can't go wrong with Zod. So the first thing that we are doing is we are having a schema called schema, and the first value here is the name, second is the email. The name is going to be a string, and the default value of the name is going to be hello world, and the email is also going to be a string, and the validation method is this email that is given to us from Zod. So Zod gives us this validation method so that we can easily validate emails without having to stress with regex or any other stuff. So that's what this schema is. What I'm also going to do here is export this out of this file so that we can actually use it outside of this file. I'll save this. I'll go back to the doc. We talked about the schema caching. So this also works for the schema caching as well. Since it's outside of the load function, it's going to be cached and memorized. Now, what we need to do is to initialize the form in the load function. Now, this might seem a little bit strange, a little bit weird to a lot of people, but I'll show you how to do this and why we are doing this. Now, go back to your editor, and in your routes folder, like I'm going to be working with the root page and the root layout. So I'm just going to create a plus page.server.ts file here, and I'll create a load function. The first thing when using Superforms is to actually initialize it in your load function. That's if you're not using XPA. If you're using XPA, there's a different other approach to this. But if you are using a full stack framework, you're using it as a full stack framework, you're using Sveltekit as a full stack framework, you want to be getting data from the server side and then pushing data to the server using actions, you definitely want to initialize the form in the load function. Now this is very simple. So I'll just say const form is equals to await super validate. And the reason why we are not getting this autocomplete is because of we have not reloaded our editor, and I like that experience, so I'm going to reload the editor. No, we just installed Superforms, so we need to reload the window. So, man, I can't live without it. Having to type this thing out by hand is the most painful thing. So yeah, that should be. So I reloaded this and it still isn't working. The auto completion has refused to work. So let's just go through the pane. This will be super validate, and this super validate is going to be from Sveltekit Superforms. The import is right here, so I'll just copy it and I'll paste this above the load function like this. And in this super validate, we need to put in our schema, our form schema. But before we put in the form schema, we need to place in what adapter we are using. And when I say the adapter, I mean the adapter for the validation library that we are using. We're using the Zod validation library. So I'm going to be using the Zod adapter. I'm going to Zod, and very careful for when you're importing Zod. You're not going to import Zod from Zod. You're going to import Zod from Sveltekit Superforms / adapter. And it's this one right here. Now I don't know why this is refusing to auto import from me, but VS Code behaves like this sometimes. Yeah, and that's it. And in here we're placing the schema. And the schema I'm going to put in is the schema from this is the schema from the schema file that I exported out. And I'll just now this auto import should work for me here. And yeah, we have this right here. And now what are we going to do with the form? Well, the first thing I'm going to do with the form is to return it to the page that we're going to be using it. So we'll have a return right here, form, like so. So now that we've returned it to the form, we've returned it to the page, we actually have access to that form on this page. So since I'm using Salt 5, I'm going to get the data. Let data is equals to $ props, and in here I can get data dot form. This is not how I want to use it, but this is how I'll get the data. Let me just comment this out and go back to the docs, because we are solely following the documentation. So after we've done that, and they're telling you that if you want the form to be initially empty, just pass the adapter as in the example above, and the form field will be filled with default values based on the schema. For example, a string field results in an empty string unless you have set a default value. Now populating from the database, so this reads populate from database. Just a little error there, typo. So if you want to populate from the database, so this is a very good example or good reason why you want to be getting it from the server load function, because of if, for example, you add default values that are in the database, you can literally just pass them into this form, and it would like populate it, pre-populate it before the page even loads. And I'll give you an example on how to use that. So let's just scroll through all of this to the displaying the form part. And this is the interesting part here. We want to see the form. So my form is going to look ugly. I did not design no CSS here. But let's copy this and actually show the form. So the first thing we want to do is use this here. So I'll copy this. Now go back to the page. Above here, I'll paste this, and I want to import this. So I'm going to import Superform from Sveltekit Superforms, and yeah, I'll place in that form that we return from the server load function. So this form right here, I'll place it inside with data.form like that. And from here, I structure a couple of things. The structure of the form, the structure of the errors, the structure constrain, the structure message, and the structure enhance. Now we can use this form or display this form simply by using a normal form element from HTML. Let's get rid of this action for now, and I'll say use and enhance. And if you know about Sveltekits, you know that they also have an enhance action, but when we're using Superform, we don't want to use the one from Sveltekit. We want to use one that Superform provides for us. And in this form, we can have inputs here. We can have two, because we have two values or fields in our schema. The first one is going to be a name, so the type of text is alright. The second one is going to be an email, so the type would be email. And we need to now bind the value to the value of the form. So we do that in Svelte. Then bind column value would be equal to $form, because of this form is a store. The $form dot, and then, as you can see, we have this auto completion. And this is going to be for name, and we'll have the same thing for the email as well. Bind value, exactly, email, like this. And we can have a submit button, Now let's take a look at our ugly form on the browser. Refresh this and it's actually there. So these forms don't have any borders. And that's the annoying thing about Tailwind. So I'm just going to do this. Since I'm going to use a lot of inputs, I'm going to add borders to those inputs. I'll go to the CSS file. Dot. Now just the inputs. So this like this. Inputs apply border to border of black. So it can be visible. We can actually see this. And I'll do something for the button as well. Let's do something for the buttons as well. What about padding? Let's just do an ugly padding of 3. That will make these things look a lot better. Alright, so doesn't look it doesn't look that better, but now we know where the forms are, we know where the inputs are, we know where the button is. So two things here you will notice is that we have two fields here. The first one is pre-filled with values. The second one is not. The reason why you are seeing something in here is because of, if you remember, in our validation schema, we placed in a default for the name, and we call this hello world. And that's why you're seeing this hello world right here. And that's something that's extremely cool. That you can actually just place in default values in the schema and it repopulates in the form. So that's one nice thing there. And another thing that we can do is actually show the errors. So when we try to submit this form and then there's an error, we can actually show those errors out. Now, if you go back to Superforms documentation, you'll see here very similar to what we are doing there, also trying to show the errors as well. So you see we have this if error dot name blah blah blah, and we also have it for the email as well. I can copy this one for the name and duplicate it for the email. So I'll put this in a div so that we don't, because this is about to get very ugly without CSS. I'll place this in a div and I'll place this in here. Now what this is doing is this is an if block. So I'm saying if the errors.name exists, so there was an error while trying to submit this form, show the error. And we'll do the same thing for the email as well. And you should see this in autocomplete. So that's one of the benefits of using Sveltekit Superforms, Zod, and TypeScript. It's like this magic combination that takes your developer experience to even another level. So if I check, I'll make this button of type of submit to make sure that this actually does that. You'll also notice that for the errors, we have this class of invalid. But that class is actually meaningful about this style. And this is basically just going to make the text red. So we can visibly see that, okay, that is an error. Let's go back to the documentation and check out a couple of other things. And you would also notice that we have this constraint. Now, I don't use this constraint and I will tell you why later on. But this is actually very good for just using the native browser validation and their error showing, like, the native things, like telling you that invalid email with that ugly pop over. But if you want that, this can actually save your time a lot, so you don't have to do all of this by yourself. So I'll copy this and I'll actually paste this here as well. And I know this gets very, I'll say ugly. You use a lot of these things, but don't worry, this thing gets a lot better. But when you at the beginning you look at this, it looks very ugly, but it gets way better. Now save this, so just so that you guys actually know what's going on here. This is just simply a type, and then we are spreading the constraint for the name. Then we are binding the value to the form.name. We're doing the same thing for the email, but for the email, it won't be for name, it will be for .email. Now, one other thing that we can do is have this super debug, and this super debug is very, very helpful when you're debugging your forms. And in our use case, it's going to be helpful to just let us know what we are doing and see things properly. So I'll just import this from Sveltekit Superforms like this. And if you check, you'd see this little thing on it's not little, this huge thing bigger than our whole form. But this thing right here, and it tells us the value, and it shows it in this JSON format. And it also gives us a status code right here. So now, how do we actually post the data from our form to the server or the database or wherever you want to post it to in our use case to the console. Well, they give us a very simple example. Yeah, using an action. We're also going to be using an action. And I'll also show you how to do this SPA mode, but for now, we use an action. And we can easily just copy this thing and paste it and modify it to fit our own use case. Go to the plus page, just server.ts file and paste this right here. So let's explain what's going on. First of all, we're getting super validate again. We're going to pass in the request, yeah, and that request is going to be the structured from your action, and then we're going to use our adapter in our own case by using the Zod adapter and placing the schema here as well. And this schema, we're placing it in here for the second time, and that's you can do the validation on the server. So the security here is tight. And we can log out the form, but in our use case, I don't want to see the whole form. I'll just see the form.data like this. And you can check whether the form was valid, and if the form was invalid, you can just return an error from Sveltekit. That'll be svelte.js/kit. You return fail. The status code of form 4 and you return the form. And if there was no error and it was successful, you can just return a message. Now this message is going to be from Sveltekit Superforms to give us this message utility function that helps us just easily send in message back to the client. Now we'll get rid of all this to comments. Now let's open our server or our console, wherever, and let's actually try to submit this form. So I'll say my name is Lawal Adibola and my email is whatever at gmail.com. Now click on submit, and this shouldn't actually work. So I can see this refreshes and it didn't work. The reason why it didn't work is because of on the client we are not actually done here. Yes, I know, just a couple of things more. First of all, we need to place in a method, and the method here is going to be post, and we need to put in an action. So the action in our own use case is just going to be slash, because of we are using the page here is the home page, the root page. So that's slash. So I'd save this, and now when I try this, we should actually get what we need. So we have Lawal Adibola and whatever at gmail.com. And I'll submit this, and it refreshes again. The reason why it kept on refreshing is because of we had this slash question mark, which was no longer that same page. So get rid of that question mark. And now let's try this. Now let's again for the third time. Lawal Adibola. As you can see, it actually updates as we write, as we type on the input. This debugger shows what we're actually writing. And for the email.com. And if I click on submit, you see it tells us invalid email for some reason. I think that email was valid, but it wasn't valid. So it gives us invalid email. And we also see things logged out to here. So as you can see, we have the hello world logged out and the email is empty. And the reason why this is showing the default value is because of this didn't actually pass the smell text. So this time, instead of logging out the data, we'll log out the whole form. And let's take a look at this one more time. So I'll leave the username the way it is. I'll add an email at gmail.com. And this is actually a bug from my code. So let's take a look at this and what's going on. And the reason why this isn't working is because of a very fundamental reason. Is when you're using a form, when you're using an HTML form natively, the natural way of using HTML forms, one essential attribute you need to add is the name of the input. So without the name, you can't identify the inputs individually. And that was one mistake that we made here. So we forgot to add the name. And in here, the name is going to be equals to name. And the name of this other input is going to be email, like this. And that is very important. Without that, Sveltekit Superforms won't be able to detect what when it's been sent to the server. On the client it knows, but on the server it doesn't. So it needs that. And with that, let's save this. And let's take this for a spin once more. So we'll leave this as a hello world because of my hands, my fingers are getting tired of typing. And I'll just place in this is my real email. As you can see, the email shows here. And when I submit, we have 200 okay. It returns back to its default value. And if we check the right here, we should see hello world logged as the name, and we should see my email logged as the email. We should also see that we have no errors. So the error object is empty, posted is true, valid is true, and the ID, which is the unique identifier for that form. And let me also show you how this validation comes into place. Like if I try to submit this without adding the email, and the email is actually required, and if I try to do this, you see we have this please fill out this field, and that is because of spread out constraint over both fields, both the email and the name. And I don't like this error. I think this bare minimum works for most cases, but personally I like to customize this types of error. So if you want to learn how to do that, but just stick onto the video and we'll get there. But for now, this works and it works out well for email validation. So if I even write in something but it's not like valid, I try to submit, it tells us that dot is used at the wrong position in Gmail. And if I try to submit this without a name, it's also showing through an error here. Okay, the reason why it's not going to throw an error for the name is because of in the schema we didn't actually, you see, we didn't actually we placed the default value, but we didn't put like a minimum required length. So if we place like a minimum, okay, I think you need to put the minimum before the default. So let me get rid of this, and I'll put dot minimum is 2, and then I can put like default as Lawal Adebola. That's my name. Okay, not spelled properly. Can't even spell my own name anymore. I'm just tired. So we'll check right now the browser, and you see that now we have Lawal Adebola as the default value for the name and an empty email. I'll place in my real email there, and I'll get rid of the value on the name. And when I try to submit this, well, it still works, and we get a 200. And the reason why that work is because of we had this default value there. So even if I clear it out, it still use this default value as the value when submitting that. And when I check right here, you see that we have Laura Debola and then the email sent there. So that's very nice. And the error showing is not the best, but it works. So when we go to the server, you see that right here we're actually returning something. So if it was processed successfully, we're returning this form processed successful message. And the way we can display that on the client is right here we have this message store that we can actually just display right here. So I can also use an if block here. So use if message, display the message. And I'll save this. And this just works like that. So let's try this out. Place my email, submit. And as you can see, we have this form posted successfully message shown here. So that's the base level of how Superform works. So that's basically the wolfing and get started docs. So there's a lot more. As you can see, we have a bunch more other things out. I'm going to show you guys, but that's the base level of how this works. And one other thing I also want to show you is putting in that default data or loading data from the server. Now, you might not actually know this data. You might, for example, a user's profile form. So the user has registered before in your application, and now you want to show him the profile form. A lot of time you want to pre-fill these fields with the information that the user has saved to your database. And the way we can do that in Superform is actually very easy, surprisingly easy. And first, what I'm going to do is just pretend like I'm getting data from a server. So I'm going to have like an object. Let's see. Data would be equals to. So we'll have the name and we'll have the email. And for the name, I'll change this from Lawal Adebola because that's what we are using to Fawaz. And I'll get rid of this default value on the schema. And how we use this is just by passing this data as the first argument and then the Zod schema for our own case. The Zod schema is second argument. And as far as this object partially matches the schema, Sveltekit Superform is going to know what to do and to handle it for you. So let's save this and let's check this in the browser. So as you can see on the browser, it has already been prefilled with this default values that we might be getting from anywhere, from the server, from different API, from anywhere, and we can just get it on the server side and show it to the user before the page even loads. So it's not like a snapping or whatever, it's just there in the form, and the user can update this they want. That's an extremely nice example, and that's basically it for this get started page. If you want to learn more, just make sure you go to superform.rocks because of it does rock and slash get started, and you'll be able to follow this same example as well. So moving on, we have the help and support page. So if you want help and support, make sure you go to their Discord. They have a Discord channel. I'll place the Discord channel on the link to the Discord channel in the description. So if you have any issues with Superforms, I'm always all ears. So I have a Twitter account as well. You can DM me and I'll be glad to help you guys. But they also have an official Discord channel that you can actually ask for questions, and these professionals will come in and help you. And we also have sponsorship. I don't know, I'm going through all this page, but I'm just trying to show you guys that if you do want to donate and be a sponsor, you can do that. Yeah, easy. So let's move on from that. Let's move straight to the interesting things. So this page is the client validation page, and this is one of my favorite page, and I've been on this page like 10 or 20 times already just today. But there are a lot of sweet things we can do here. If I decide to start going from line to line and showing you everything, it's going to be a lot. So again, learn how to go to the docs and read it, but I will just give you a briefing on how a lot of these things work. So you a lot of time want to do client-side validation and then also server-side validation. And if you're doing server-side validation, you might think that doing client-side validation is a bit redundant, but it's not, because of with server-side validation, the user doesn't know whether he had an error or not until he submits the form and then the form resolves or whatever. And that's a long time. So imagine me filling a form, making a bunch of errors, and I don't know what error I made until I submit the form and wait for the server to return to me a message telling me that there was an error. That's annoying. You should have told me this before the whole submitting. Even if I click on the submit button, I should be told that immediately that there's an error here. I don't need to send the data to the server and then validate it then and send it back. That's a terrible experience. So this client-side validation gives the user a way better experience. It makes the user know straight up that there's an error here, there's an error there. Doesn't have to let him wait till the data gets to the server, gets validated there, and then there's a message returned for him. So that's what Superforms help us do. And the first thing they show you is this constraint that I told you that I don't like at all. And this constraint is that browser's default native validation, client validation, and I think it works for most cases, but never for my own case, because I just don't like the way it looks like. I like to be able to customize my own errors, and we can get rid of all of that. Now we're going to come here and use the validation schema, and this is where things get very interesting. And in Superforms, what we can do is basically just pass in client validation by using very similarly to the way we do it on the server. So I'll show you. Let's go back to the page, to our ugly page with our ugly form. And right here, after we place in the form as the first argument in Superform, data.form, we can pass in an option object. And here we can have a bunch of options here. Now this is where the power actually comes in Superform. What we want to do here is just add validators. And these validators, we need to place in our schema. And now this is one of the other reasons why I place the schema in the schema file, so that we can use it on the server, use it on the client, use it wherever we want to use it. Now, first of all, we need to use our adapter, and not like the way we use the adapter in the server where we just use this Zod adapter. We're going to be using this Zod client adapter, and this is way lighter than the one we use on the server, and it just helps free up space so we don't end up using all these things. So you can go to the docs to read about the client versions of these adapters, but they are basically the same thing. And we can pass in the schema, and we can get the schema from lib/schema.ts actually, but Sveltekit does this thing that EasyJS. And just like this, we are getting client-side validation. So before this gets submitted and then thrown um to the server and returned, it will validate on the client. So we don't actually need to use this constraint anymore with the ugly errors. One other thing that we can actually look at here is the validation method. So we have auto, we have on input, we have on blur, we have on submit. By default, I believe that we use on submit, but you can switch this to whatever one you want. Basically, by coming here, comma, and then using validators method and switch this to wherever you want. I like the on submit, works well for me, so I'm using that. And yeah, so there are a bunch of things that you can read on here. So we can validate it at any point on time that we want to validate by using this validate function. And we also have this validate form that lets you validate the whole form instead of validating a single field. And we can test this out now to actually see the way this works. So if I go to my application, I get rid of the email. I click on submit. So as you can see, we have this invalid email, and this is without this thing being sent to the server. So you can see it's immediate, and we don't have that ugly popover show here. So if I place in the email, it tells us form processed successfully. If I get rid of the name, submit, it tells us that string must contain at least 2 characters. Now we can customize the error message, but since most people will be using different validation libraries, I don't want to go deep into Zod, but with Zod we can customize the error message, and with whatever validation library you are using, you most likely would also be able to do that as well. But yeah, it's as simple as that, and the validation happens on the client first. And remember that you can actually customize these errors the way you want. Mine is just very ugly because of what I'm trying to. This is a crash course, not a perfect production tutorial, but as you can see, it works. And it only shows this error when we submit. Once we submit and we have errors, we need to submit before we see the errors again. And that might not be the best for a lot of you. I like it that way. But one way we can fix this a lot of time is to just change the validation method. So we have auto, we have on blur, we have on input, we have on submit, and we have submit only. So let's go with on input. Now let's go with on blur. On blur is when we actually, I want to believe, I'm not sure what all these ones mean, but it's when we actually leave the field. So we've blurred out of the field. So let's see. If I get rid of this and I click outside, so I didn't click on the submit button, but I clicked outside, it tells me that the email was invalid. So let me place in my email. Or let's say we had an error here. I forgot to put the dot, and I click outside to this other field right here, the user name field, and you see that this invalid error is still showing. But when I put in the dot, it still shows, but once I click outside, it disappears. So that's how this on blur works. We also have on input, and that's going to be when you're typing, and yeah, we have a bunch of them. So I just go with the on submit or auto most of the time. That's how we can do the client side validation. As I said, there's a bunch of things here. You can go ahead and read through this if you want to gain better understanding on them. But that's basically on the baseline level how it works. So error handling, that's the next page here. As you can see, by destructuring errors from Superform, you get an object with form errors that you can display where it's appropriate. That is basically identical to what we've been doing by showing the errors. And we can also have this area.-invalid. This is very helpful so that if you have a very long form and we clicked on submit, it would scroll to wherever it is and focus on the first error it catches. So without this area-invalid attributes, whenever there's an error, it doesn't actually focus on it, which is very great for like mobile experience. So if we get rid of this and I'm no more focused on this and I submit, as you can see, the focus is not on the input. Now, I don't know if you can see this, but if you are following this tutorial and you're actually writing your own code as I code this, you'll see that the focus is no longer on the input, right? And it's going to be very nice on a mobile screen. If you clicked on submit, there was an error, it screws you up to where the error is, it focuses on that field, it pops up the input stuff and it tells you that there's an error. So it's automatic. You can easily just correct it. So that's what this field helps us to do. So I'll copy this and I'll place this in our code. Yeah, a lot of things that we are copying and pasting, making this input or this form look very ugly, but I'm telling you, just stick with me. It gets better. So I'll copy this. I think this is okay like this. I'll copy this and I'll place this for the inputs as well. I mean, for the email as well. This is going to be for the email. Now save this. Yeah. Now let's take a look at this. If there was an error here, I clicked on submit. You see it's focused on it directly, so I can start typing. If I remove this, I clicked on submit. There's a focus on it automatically as well. Again, you might not be able to see, but it's actually working. Trust me. Trust me, bro. It's working. Now we have that, and it's very, very nice experience you get. And one extremely nice utility function that Sveltekit Superform gives us is this set error utility function. So let's read this. Most errors would be set automatically when the data is validated, but you may want to add errors after determining that the data is valid. This is easily done with the set error helper function. This is an helper function. I use it almost all the time, especially when I'm dealing with um like login and registration. So let's see one example we can use it for here. Now, if we set the error, we can easily just get this from the errors object as well. So first of all, we need to go to the action, and in the action, whether there was an error or not, we're always going to tell them that the email exists. So what we are doing is basically it doesn't make any sense, but so that I can actually show you this and the way it works. That's what we're doing. So the first argument here is going to be the form. The second is going to be the field. So we have name or email. So we are going for the email, and the third is going to be the message, the error message that we want to display. That's what this set error upper function can help us do. So when we submit to this, now this is actually in the load function, not on the or in the action. I want to put this in the action. Now when we actually submit this form, it's going to tell us that whether it was valid or not, because we are not checking whether it's valid or not. It's going to tell us that the email we placed in was already in our database or in our users storage. So I'm going to go back to the form, and this is the email right here. And if I submit this, you see it telling us this error, the email already exists. Now this can be useful for a lot of use cases, like you want to register a new user and the user plays in this email, and you can't know on the client whether the email exists, or you can't know before the user submits the form to the server that the email exists. You need to check on the server first, and then when you check on the server, you can send this customized error message to that particular input. So you can see this is targeting this email input, and you can tell them that the email exists and they'll be focused on this, and you can easily change this to whatever other email that they want to use. So that's very nice. And we have all this blah blah blah, and you can also do this for initial form. So when you are loading the form from the load function, if you want the errors to be initialized there and then you can just set the errors options to true. All right, and they are telling you the usage on the client. Now you can do this. So they have a bunch of options here, and I'll say most of them, 90% of them, their default value works perfect. So we have this sticky nav bar, which you're going to have to place this in. So if you have a nav bar that's sticky, so that when this is scrolling to the top, the nav bar doesn't distract it. So you place in like a reference to the nav bar element. Yeah, and Superforms would automatically calculate the width and all that stuff for you, so that the nav bar does not disrupt the form when it's scrolling to the top. And we have this scroll to error, so you can turn this off. You can say yes or no. You can say smooth. You can say auto. We have this autofocus on error, which is also a boolean value or detect. So detect will detect the error and autofocus on it, the input and autofocus on it, or you can turn this off by saying false. So you have control over the way these errors they behave, and this is basically the whole thing written here, but in more details. So you can actually go ahead and read through this. And if you also want to undo the errors in a deeper level, like in Zod when you're using this refine, like a password confirm field, you can also do this as well. It's very easy, very very similar, and yeah, it goes really deep into how you can use this. But for the baseline level, like 70 to 90% of the time, this is how you'll be using it. Like so, let me get rid of this constraint. Don't need this sucker anymore. But this is how you'll be using it 90% of the time. But for the advanced use cases, they also got you covered as well. So let's move on to the events. Now, give me a minute. Let me take a cup of coffee. I'll be right back. All right. So let's read through this together. Events. A number of events give you full control over the submit process. They are triggered every time the form is submitted. Now we have this alert telling us that events are only available when JavaScript is enabled in the browser and custom use enhancers added to the form. So for you to use that event, it's very important that you use that use enhance that Sveltekit Superform provides for us, not the one that Sveltekit itself provides. And they give you this event flowchart to tell you how it works. So first of all, the form is submitted. The first event that runs is this on submit event, and you can actually just cancel this. So they tell you that server or SPA response action result, and then we have this on result as well. And then after this on result, depending on whether it is redirect to cancel, we have the on updates or the on error. So whether if this was cancelled, we would have this on error. If this was successful or failed, we have this on update, and after that, the form will be updated. Then we have this unupdated. Now that might not be the clearest explanation, but we'll go through this one by one to show you how this works. And it's not even about going through this one by one. It's about telling you use cases where you would want to use this and when. So for the unsubmit is immediately after the user triggers the button to submit the form. So one thing that I use this for a lot is to modify the user's input. So once the user clicks on submit, before we send this to the server, we can take whatever the valid user placed in the form, take them, do whatever we want to do with them, and then continue the process. So let's say the user submitted, we told the user to write their name and they wrote their name and they clicked on the submit button. And in our application, we want every name to be appended with an @ so we can just take the user's value or the user's name, whatever the user imputed there. If it's valid, we take it, we append it with an @ symbol, and then we send it along the way to the server. So you can do that on the on submit part. The on result, you probably will never use this. I have never used this as well. I won't lie to you, but this on result, you can read through this, but in most cases, you don't have to care about action results. To check if the form validation succeeds, use unupdated or unupdate if you want to modify or cancel the result before it's displayed. And they tell you the common usage why you want to use this, like redirect, and most of the times you won't have to use this, to be sincere with you. And now we have the onUpdate method. Now this is best for most of the cases when you are doing server single page applications, on doing all these client applications, and you want to send the data that you've gotten from the form to an API endpoint. So you're not building a full stack application where you can just send it directly to the database from the server action. You want to send it to your, let's say, your Rust backend or your Golang backend, Python backend, whatever. You want to do this in an SPM mode and not use actions. You can just get the form results on the onUpdate, validate it there. So use form.valid to check whether it's valid, and then send the form to the API endpoint from there. I use this a lot because of a lot of time I'm working just as a front-end developer, and then there's a back-end developer somewhere across the globe, and I just send it to his endpoint. I don't need to use an action because of the action is not really useful in this case since I'm not talking directly with my database. Though actions are useful for use cases where JavaScript is going to be disabled, but let's be frank, who is disabling is JavaScript in his browser. So for SPA mode, you definitely want to use onUpdate, and onUpdated a lot of time is useful to show like toast notification after the whole thing has been done. So just like the way we are getting the message from the server and just showing it on the client, we might want to show this programmatically. So one clean way we can do this is just use unupdated. So with unupdated is when the whole thing has completed, it has brought back the response from the server, and we can just get that and we can check whether it was valid or not. And if it was valid, we can just do something like show a post notification programmatically like this. And we also have an error which you most likely would not use as well. And yeah, so that's it for this page. Again, didn't go deeply detail because the crash course, and you can check this out by yourself. Very easy. It's right there on the internet, for God's sake. Just go to superforms.org and you have all this information to yourself. Now we have the next page, which is file upload, and this actually came into Superforms from because of a lot of people requested for this, including myself, and it was brought into Superforms in the version 2. This is one of the new things in Superforms, and as you can see from what they wrote here, from version 2, Superform has full support for file upload. For that, you need a schema that can validate files or as that possibility. Now, I don't know about the other schemas on that schema list or the other validation libraries on that schema list, other validation library list. I know that Zod can do it. That's why I use Zod. But for the rest, you have to check. I want to believe that they all can because of validating files is not that hard, but Zod can do it. And with Zod, you just need to validate it simply by using the instance and then checking the file, using your message, and you can use refine to check things like the size or the type and all that good stuff. And it works very similar to the way validating the fields work, but with files like images, for example. And you need to do some things differently. So, for example, if you want to send back messages like, for example, fill. The last time we used fill, we used the one from Sveltekit/kit, and we get fill. But this fill would not work properly if we were sending the form, and the form included a file. It won't work properly. So Sveltekit Superforms saves the day again by giving us this fill utility that we can use. You can just replace it with the one that Sveltekit gives us, and this would work perfectly for the form that has file. And they also have this with file utility as well that they give. So you can use this or you can use this fill. And they give this example, and they said the recommended way to bind to the file input, because of now you also need to bind to the file input just the way you bind to the input of text and emails. To bind to the file input, you have to use this file proxy or files proxy, but you can also do it with an on input handler, which is boring. We don't want to use that. So here's an example for both, which also shows you how to add client-side validation to the files as well, which can save plenty of bandwidth. So instead of again going back to the server and then sending the whole files to the server, realizing that there's an error and then sending it back, you won't probably want to do that on the client. So as you can see, first of all, we have the schema, and then we have the proxy method, which we do everything normally the way we want to do them. But here we have this file proxy, which is from Sveltekit Superforms, and it's going to be for that file. And we're placing the name of the schema, the name of the field in the schema, which is image. Yeah, and we place in the form itself. And we don't bind to that image, we bind to this file. And this file is a store, so we use $sign. Now I don't want to have to write this out every time. I can just walk you through this. And we can do this for multiple files as well. So it's very similar, but for multiple files, we use files proxy. There. And you can also validate the files manually. So this is for use cases where your validation library cannot validate the files. You can just obtain form data from the request and extract the files from there after validation. Simple as that. And we can also have progress bar for loading. So if you like a progress bar for large file uploads, check custom request option for the on-submit event. So they take care of all these little use cases and just make using files in Sveltekit Superforms a breeze. So you definitely want to check out this page if you want to learn how to use files or upload files with Sveltekit Superforms. Now we also have this loading timers. Another cup of coffee. Give me a minute. Now most times when you want to submit a form, you want to show a loading state to let the user know that form is being submitted to the server. Be patient. We'll give you a response very soon. And you can do this very easily with Sveltekit Superforms. They have these two options: delay milliseconds and timeout milliseconds, that you can actually um configure by yourself and set your custom values. But the default is most times, for most cases, the best. And I'll show you why and how and when you use these options. So they have this submit states diagram that they place here. So, and this is determined by the delay milliseconds and the timeout milliseconds. So after a certain time, your form is submitted, and the timer changed the timers change state, and the states are ideal, and then from ideal it goes to submitting, and then from submitting it goes to delayed, and then from delayed it goes to timeout. Now, once you click on the button, immediately click on the button, submitting becomes true. Then after 500 milliseconds, delayed becomes true, and after 8,000 milliseconds, which is about 8 seconds, timeout becomes true. Now, these are the three states that you can listen to. A lot of people just listen to this submitting and forget about the rest. So once they click on the button, the submitting has begun, and they can show like a loading indicator, like a spinner, right? So whether if submitting is true, they show a spinner that indicates to the user that their process has begun and their form is being submitted to the server. But what I use and what Superforms recommend is to use delayed. Now, the reason to use delayed is 500 milliseconds, so it's not that far ahead of. I think that's half a second. It's not that far ahead of submitting, but at the same time, it gives the user this experience that this submitting process was faster than it actually was. So when they click on the submit button, it doesn't actually start loading immediately. It loads half a second later, and then it's done before the user even knows it. So they click on submit, half a second the loading shows, and within another half a second the loading disappears and it's form submitted. So the lesser time that they see that loading indicator, the better the experience. Basically, what I'm trying to say. So it gives them this feel that the app was faster than it actually was. The submitting process was faster than it actually was, and that's why it's recommended to use delayed instead of submitting. And you guys can go read this article. It actually explains that properly. And but you can use whatever you want to use actually. You can go for submitting, you can go for delayed, whatever you want. So you can even have a custom one created that you want to use. It's all up to you. And yeah, let's move on. We have the multiple forms page. I know this is probably the worst crash course that you guys have ever watched, because of at this point not even coding anymore. I'm just reading the docs and explaining, but I feel like this is great. You guys should learn how to read the docs. Reading the docs is actually very important. It's not just coding mindlessly like a freaking robot. Read the docs and understand what's going on, because of you code with me today and tomorrow the docs change and whatever I thought here is going to be thrown into the dustbin. It's not going to be useful anymore. So learning how to go through the docs, very very essential as your life as a developer. So we have the multiple form on the same page, and we can easily have multiple forms on the same page due to this ID in that Sveltekit Superform gives us. Now, Sveltekit Superform uses this to identify each form. So if you read this, with Superforms, multiple form on the same page are handled automatically, so you don't have to worry about this. If you are using the use enhance, so this only works if you're using that use enhance that Sveltekit Superform provides for us. The form have different schema types. When using the same schema for multiple forms, you need to set the ID option. Now, this is a very rare case. I don't know why you're using the same schema for multiple forms, but if you are, you're going to need to set this manually. So by setting an ID on the server, you ensure that only forms with the matching ID on the client will react to the updates. And we have this alert, different schema type, meanings, different fields and types. So just copying the schema and just giving it a different variable name will still count as the same schema. The content of the schemas have to differ. Very important. And I give you an example on how to use the same form. I mean, multiple forms on the same page with different schema. So we have the login schema, we have the register schema, which are two different schemas, and then we are sending the login form, the register form differently, and we have two actions, the login action and register action, and we have the page right here. So we have the form for the login, which is this, then we have the form for the register, which is this. and we can log in, we can initialize two different super forms. So we have this one for the register. I don't know why I keep on clicking on that. And we have this one for the login as well. So very, very clean. And you can test this out by yourself if you want to. I'm not going to test this out, but you can do it if you want. And we also have nested data here. And now in examples where you have a schema that is nested, so you have an array, you have an object, and it goes how many level deep? I don't know. But for those use cases, that is not naturally the way a form on HTML works. A form in HTML, you can't nest the form inside other, you can't nest the input fields inside other input fields. And that's what you essentially would be doing by the time you have a nested schema, because if you can do that, it's JavaScript, it's Zod, you can nest, you can have objects, you can have arrays. And that's not naturally the way HTML forms undo the values. So for those use cases, Sveltekit Superform comes in again, saves the day by giving us this data type option that we can set to either form or JSON. By default, it's form, and then it uses the way the native HTML form works. With the form data type, you can't nest things, but with the JSON data type, you can nest things down. And switching into by simply setting data type to JSON, you can store any data structure allowed by the value, which is a library, in the $sign form store, and you don't have to worry about field cohesions, converting strings to object and arrays, etc. You don't even have to set a name. Alright, that's dope. You don't even have to set a name on the form fields anymore, since the actual data is $sign form is now posted, not the input field in the HTML. So it's now the value being posted. And I don't know, I feel like this should actually be the default. If you ask me, just setting this to JSON by default seems to make more sense than having this form. But I understand why you want to stick to the way the native HTML form works as much as possible. But once you set this into JSON, this feels more like JavaScript than it feels HTML, because of now we are using JSON. So it's not sending back the input. And that was the issue we had the last time, that it didn't work. We had set a name. If we had set the data type to JSON, it's that won't be an issue, because of the name attribute would not be needed anymore. So let's go. They are now simply UI components for modifying a data model, as they should be. Name attributes can still be useful for the browser to prefill fields though. So that's a very good use case why you will need name attributes. So now they give you this little warning here as well, telling you that when the data type is set to JSON, the unsubmit event would contain form data, but it cannot be used to modify the posted data, which I said was a use case for the unsubmit event. You need to set update form, or in special cases use JSON data in unsubmit. This also means that disable attributes, which normally prevents input fields from being submitted, will not have that effect. Everything in form will be posted when data type is set to JSON. And that's a caveat, but I think it's a good one. It's a good trade-off. So modifying the form store programmatically is easy. You can just use the $sign form dot the field. So $sign form dot email, $sign form dot name, and you can just modify that. And they tell you that, but note that this would tint the affected field, which you probably want. You want this to tint the affected. Why won't you want that? But if you're actually in a use case where you don't want the form field to be tainted, you can just use form.update with an extra option, which is tint false. And then they have requirements. So to use the JSON, because of now we're using it in this JavaScript format, we need JavaScript to be enabled in the browser, and the form has to have this use enhanced that is given to us from Sveltekit Superforms. And now we have another issue here, because now we can do this nested data submitting. Okay, that's great, but we also need to be able to handle nested errors and constraint. And Sveltekit Superforms supposing saves day again does this, I'll say, almost automatically for you as well. Doesn't really bother you, but all you really have to do at this point, for example, an array, you need to be able to know what position the error is. And with this, in this example, they're using this index to just easily get what position the error is. So it's not that hard, it works. Now we have arrays with primitive types. So primitive types like strings, for example. So with primitive types like string. Also very easy as well. They give a clear example of how this would work. They have this tags example, and they're simply just using again the index. This goes down and on and on and on. There are a couple of things that you can learn from this if you read this on your own. Again, move on to the documentation, read this, and you should have most of your issues cleared. And we also have proxy objects. I'm not going to go through that. That one is pretty unnecessary for most cases. So let's just skip that and go to SPA. Now, this SPA is one that you probably want to focus on because of a lot of times you're not posting data directly to your own database. As I said previously, you probably have a different backend or a different developer working on the backend, and doing actions in that case, in my own opinion, is not the best option. So when you have those kind of use cases, you probably don't want to be doing the validation on the server and then sending it to the other server, and that other server is doing the validation again. You probably just want to do the validation on the client and send it straight away to the server, wherever it is, and then the server there does the validation. And then again, you understand. So doing the validation two places, it's not a bad thing. But doing it in three doesn't make any sense. So they have this very simple thing. So it just simply set SPA to true in the options of the performs like this. And now it won't actually submit this to the form action. And now you don't need to set an action. You do need the use enhance added there, but you don't need to set the action. And you can get um the form and its values and whether it was valid or not from the on update event. So you can easily just get that. And you don't actually need the plus page dot server.cs file anymore because of you don't need to load the data or the schema from the server anymore since you are full SPA mode. You can just use the plus page.ts and you can just load the schema from there. And if you don't want to use the plus page.ts because of you just don't it doesn't make any sense at that point, you can just directly load it directly inside the Superform. So you can use this default function that Sveltekit Superform gives us, and you can just pass your adapter with this schema. So since you can't use top level await in Svelte components, which is a bummer, you can't use super validate directly in plus page.svelte as it is in async. But if you want the default value only for the schema, you can import defaults to avoid having a plus page.ts file. So if that was the only reason for the plus page.ts file, it's not needed. You can just use this default right here. And it will pass in a default value from the schema. And I tell you with initial top level data. So this is the same thing. If you had initial data like this name email, you can just pass it as a first argument, and then the schema with the adapter as the second, and that's all for that. And then we have snapshots. Now snapshots is for those use cases where you write something on the form, you go to another page, you come back, and it disappears. A lot of times that's annoying, or maybe it's refreshed, and then you feel like 10 views, and then the whole thing disappears, and it's like, what? So for those use cases, Sveltekit actually came in here to save the day. It was Sveltekit first, so as you can see, a nice feature of Sveltekit is snapshots. And Sveltekit's platform just gives you this easier way of doing it and an easier way of adding this with your Sveltekit Superforms features. So if we added like a name here and an email, I believe if I refresh this, it won't actually disappear. So let's refresh this and let's scroll down back. As you can see, we have Lawal and we have our email. And this is very easy to use just by getting snapshots, destructuring the capture and the restore. We have status message, which is just this message from Superforms. I've showed you how to use this previously as well. You can basically just pass anything to this message. It's all for you. The only thing you need to pass is the form. So you return the form through this, and then whatever else you can return an object, a string, a boolean, and you can also type this. You can make sure this is strongly typed, by going to your app.d.ts and adding the type for the message that you want. Works seamlessly like that. And there are multiple ways of using this. You can again go to the documentation this page and read about it, but it has one limitation, and that limitation is when you are sending back this message, but at the same time you're redirecting, you can't actually do that. It's not possible. So it's either you redirect, or you send back this message. So a way to actually fix that issue is Sveltekit Superforms, or the creator of Sveltekit Superform, created this library called Sveltekit Flash Messages that kind of combines redirecting and sending a message at the same time. That works perfectly well. So you can check out the documentation as well. I'll place the link to this if I remember. I'll place the link to this in the description as well. So we have strict mode, which is just the different modes that you can use. And this has its own caveat. I don't like using the strict mode, but I think this is the default. But you can set this to true or false if you want. And we have the submit behavior. Yeah. Now Superforms provides you with options that you can customize so that you can control how the submit behavior happens. Right at the roots, when a form is submitted, it is important for the UX to show that things are happening on the server. Superforms provide you with loading timers, which we're taking a look at, and the filling options for handling this. So we have this clear on submit and this multiple submits. For the multiple submits option, you can prevent this, you can allow, and you can abort. By default, is prevent, which is most likely the best, but you might want to um allow this. That's why you can actually customize this and say allow multiple forms to be submitted at the same time. And we also have this clear on submit. So the clear on submit option decides what should happen when the form, what should happen to the form when submitting. It can clear the status message, all the errors, both or none. The default is to clear the message, which is a good default. If you don't want any, if you don't want any jumping content, which could occur when the error and the message are removed from the DOM, setting this to none can be useful. And we have the multiple submit as well, so you can do that. We have tinted fields, the tinted field page. Now, when the form data is modified, right now I'm I'm fidgeting right now. I think I took a bit too much coffee. I'm fidgeting. Look, I'm talking at 2x speed. I believe you're probably slowing this shit down. But let's go. When the form data is modified through modifying $sign form, so you can actually just modify the form data directly like that. The modified data, and in turn the form is called start tinted. Yes, also known as dirty in other form libraries. A super form feature is to prevent the user from losing data when navigating away from a tinted form. And you have this tinted message. And now you can see you can set the options to true to have a default message in English showing when navigating away from the tinted form. So if they are moving away from the tinted form, a little alert would show at the top telling them that hey, you have things you've written on this form, you're gonna lose it if you leave. As if if you're not using these snapshots to tell the user that if they leave this form, it's gonna leave. So note that this message will only display when navigating to a page within the same site. When closing the tab or reloading the page, a browser default message will be shown instead. Alternatively, you can set tinted message to a promise option. Promise option. No, this is promise boolean. What is that? But this is a function that returns a boolean function that should resolve to true if navigating always is okay. So this enables you to provide your own dialogue. Okay, this is a very good use case if you want to place in your own dialogue and show customized UI to the user. So the code demonstrates the custom dialog with skeleton modal. Try it below, modify the form, then click on the back button. A modal should pop up, preventing you from losing the changes. So this is a very nice feature. So I'm going to place this in here and I'll try to go back. And you see the pop-up shows telling us that changes that were made would not be saved. And you can confirm, you can cancel, and if you cancel, you don't actually go to the back. Now we have this untinting the form. Now when a successful validation result is returned for the form with a valid status set to true, the form is automatically marked as untinted. Try that by posting the form with a valid value. The tinted form should not appear when browsing away from the page. Now you can actually do that. And you can also prevent tinting the form as well by using tint is equals to false. Now we've checked this, we've looked at this previously. And the options are whether boolean, that's true or false, untinted or untint, For login and registration forms, password managers could automatically tint the form when inserting saved usernames and password. So that is when you have like the name attribute on the field. It will just add that automatically. Now let's move to the next page, which is the use. Okay, all right, caught us there. Let's go to the use enhanced page. Now this is a very important page as well that you most definitely want to check this out. So this use enhance works very similar to the way the one given to us by Sveltekit works as well, but there are few differences. So now this one is actually very important when using Sveltekit Superforms because you can do a lot of things um like um, for example nested forms and all that good jazz. But you can take a look at this by yourself. It basically just tells you what you can do with it. And one of my major use cases for this is doing optimistic updates. I think they have a they have an option right here for this. So there can be a conflict between data returned from the form action and the new data load function. The form action data is optimistic, meaning that what's returned would be displayed, assuming that all data was supposed to be updated. But if you update the form partially, the form data would be out of sync with the load function's data, in which case you might want to wait for the load function's data. This can be achieved by setting invalidate or false. Now the load function data will be prioritized, and the reset function would also will also use the latest load function data when cancelled. Now this is actually a error that I've actually had. So reading this, I've just realized how to solve a certain bug that I've been having in an application. So that's nice. But there are a couple of things you can do here. You can read it by yourself. I do optimistic updates and optimistic UI. So click a button to send something on the server, immediately show the user notification that it was successful and things like that. You can actually do that when using this um use enhance. And this actually another use case for this is you don't actually see like loading states. You don't the browser doesn't actually load. So you are sending something to the server. The natural behavior is for the browser to load, but this use enhance if JavaScript is enabled, does this on the client. So gives the user a good experience. And that is it all for the whole concept part. We have this docs. In this docs we have this guide, and the guide tells you how to do a couple of other things. It talks about super debug, which is that this big thing we have right here. Talks more in detail about it. Talks more in details about default values. They have a CRUD tutorial on how to do like a simple full stack CRUD application, and they have a I hope I get this pronunciation right. Componentization, componential. God, they have this page, and this page basically tells you how to componentize. I think that's what componentize the inputs. Right. So, for example, let me just show you that this um is headache. This is an headache, especially when you have a lot of forms and a lot of fields. Writing this whole thing over and over and over again is it's a lot of headache. So, what's the issue here in this page? I'm not going to try and pronounce it again. Is how to actually componentize this thing and just reuse it, so you don't have to always have to create these forms and have all these attributes on them every single time. But one great library that has already done all this work for us and makes using super forms even better is called Form Snap. Now, Form Snap from the same guy or people that did um Chassis and Svelte and Bit UI. Now, this just componentize the the aspect of super forms that should be componentized because of this. I'll tell you for a fact, it's not the cleanest way of using a form. I've been to write this whole thing. It's kind of annoying. So what this does, it does give you super form, but in components that you can just easily import into your application. And I told you that if you stuck with me, I'll show you something that will make all these thing a breeze. And this is the library. So it works hand in hand in conjunction with Superforms and whatever validation library you are using, and it just makes it way easy. And most of the time, you want to use this, you are probably using Chassis and Svelte, which is another library created by the same guys that created from Snap, but for components. And one of the components that they offer is forms, and they are using these form snaps under the hood. So you probably watched a couple of my videos tutorials in the past, and I use chassis and svelte for form. It's actually this library that is being used under the hood. And as you can see, this is the typical Sveltekit Superforms. How many lines is this? This is one, two, three, four, five, six, seven. 7 lines. That's a lot of lines for one input field. But when form snap comes in, we have all right, so still a bunch of lines, but componentized, and it's just way better. You're not writing as much. First of all, we need to have this fuse, and then we have this control. Now, I don't usually use this control, but you can have this control, and then tell it um on the label. That's if you want the label, and then the input right here, and then the description, and then the error. So just put in this fuse error to automatically know what field you want this error to be for because of its placed inside of this fields tag or field element. And you can do that for all the other forms. And as you can see, this actually seems like a lot, but it's actually way better. And I believe using chassis and svelte for these forms even makes it a lot better because of it just doesn't make this code way simpler. It adds styles to it as well. And you are free to customize the styles how you would like. And they have a bunch of other options that you can read through. So they have the fuse set, element fuse, control label description, and blah blah blah. And again, this stock would also be in the description as well. And that's for the most part it. I know this is probably the worst tutorial you probably watched. Thank you very much. It's an honor. And the dogs, everything is here. So these guys have spent just too much time making this dog as perfect as possible for another douchebag like myself to now come in and do like a full complete tutorial, like see if he came up with this whole thing. Most of the guys that do tutorial on YouTube, they go to the documentation to read it. So just go straight to the source, the docs. It's not that bad. The experience in the docs, they've gotten way better. This is not the days of AWS and Google anymore. These guys come in and they prioritize your experience. So using the docs is just it's a great way to tell them thank you. Going to their docs and reading it is a great way to tell them thank you for working on this project. So make sure that you guys check this out and make sure that you guys sponsor to this beautiful project if you can. Donate, go ahead and donate. And the Discord, again, Discord link will be in the description. You guys should go and check out the Discord. And that's it for this tutorial. Thank you very much, and I'll see you guys in the next video.